Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a very special and scary werewolf creepypasta that I just discovered. It was posted quite some years back, guys, so some of you may have heard this, some of you may have not. Either way, this is a fantastic story, guys, and I'm very excited to feature part one of the series entitled Shards of the Moon, Chapter 1. Let's get straight into that. Boulder City, Nevada, or what was left of it, after the cataclysm nearly 20 years ago. All that's managed to survive of the city is a small group of houses in an old suburban area, which has been rebuilt into the bustling trade stop along the caravan routes through the long road of the state's backbone. The sun's first light was cresting over the tops of the mountains in the distance, and it already looked like it was going to be a beautiful day. Beautiful for all the long hours people prayed would last just a few seconds more. As soon as the orange light filled the streets, doors came unbolted from their heavy security and swung open with vigour as the townsfolk nearly burst from their homes to get started to work. So much to do, so little time. The mass of people living in the city stop always had something to do. They never rested for more than a few minutes. Crops needed tending, backup generators required service and refueling. Caravans were moving in off the long road with fuel stocks and groceries for sale. With a great whine, the huge generator that once operated the now decrepit hospital now brought life to the mechanisms of the city. Life proceeded as usually as it could after the Armageddon. But still, people worked themselves to the bone every second, trying to get one more thing done. One more caravaner ready to make the next leg of the long road to Reno before night might fall. But just as everyone feared, for every second of every day that passed this hectic way, the sun was quickly beginning to set. Bright white turned to yellow, then orange as the sun started to creep behind the distant horizon. Last hasty trades were made as people began to quickly retreat back to their homes. An overhead siren could be heard, blaring away at the danger of the setting sun, but no one paid any mind to it. They were already well on their way back to safety of their homes. Generators placed far away from homes cranked to life and hummed quietly as the noisy main generator for the town chugged to a stop, leaving only this discordant absence of noise. Men stood outside their doorsteps as the last breaths of the town were taken. Bleach or other harsh-smelling chemicals were spread on the doors and decks to mask whatever might be lingering. Caravan trucks that wouldn't make the journey tonight were pulled into the old fire department garage. Everyone was so interested in their own preservation to see the next bustling day that no one had noticed that a teenage girl had been tossed from the rat race by a rough step into an alleyway, and that the impact of her head against the side of the brick wall had knocked her cold out. Either no one noticed or no one cared. Either way, no one stopped to help her. People rushed back into their homes, doors bolting behind them loudly as they barred themselves from the dangers of the outside world. And so, another day passed, as it has for the last 20 years, living for the sunlight and dreading the night. The only difference now was, the young girl is in the devil's playground. As she slowly came to, her balance still reeling from the impact, a hand to the sharp sting on her temple, she winced in a moment of pain. took a couple of seconds to right the world, but after it levelled back out, she saw something that she had never seen in her 19 years on this changed Earth. The night sky. She saw millions and millions of bright stars atop the gently swaying trees, and a few lazy clouds around the ultra-bright full moon. It was a gorgeous first sight, but it came with a heavy sink in her stomach and a gripping fear. Outside, at night. She had to get back home. She had to get inside. But as she looked around at the faceless buildings, the blackened street, she could hardly even see her own feet with the moonlight. Her bearings were all wrong. She knew where she thought she was, but nothing was familiar to her. She was utterly lost. Panting with a rush of panic, she set off down the street adjacent, hoping to see some landmark that might give her a location away. But everything looked so different now, devoid of detail. It could have been the night, or the knock to the head, or both. The wind was blowing, rustling the trees, the only sound than her own breathing. It was eerie, how quiet it was. But what was even worse was that when the wind momentarily dropped, she heard something else. A low, loud growl in the distance. Her body froze as she came around the corner of a stone building. All she could see was the useless, faceless buildings and streets. But at the end of the block, something dark, big and moving. She was still frozen in place, trying to tell her legs to move, but they wouldn't respond at first. Finally, she was able to muster the strength to pick up one of her heavy legs and step back. But a loud crunch of gravel was waiting underfoot. Before she knew it, a pair of golden eyes was cutting through the night and right into her. Suddenly, the golden eyes started to move through the darkness, followed fast by the black blur behind it and a ferocious growl. Her legs suddenly snapped to attention and she was allowed to run, turning the corner and going the other way down the street. She ran as hard as she could, but a high rise in the asphalt of the unkept street caught her toe, sending her tumbling along the ground. She managed to roll onto her back and start to get up when she saw the black blur coming around the corner. Now, though it was close enough to have shape, it was larger than a man, bulkier and covered in a shaggy, dark fur. It had a long face with pointed ears and shining white teeth, bared and coming for her. She stared with a frozen terror. She knew that she was dead, but something happened then that she didn't expect. A boot came down onto the street between the monster and her, followed by the incredibly loud report of a gunshot. With all that had been going on, she wasn't exactly sure, but she saw vague happenings of the monster still mid-air, coming for the dark-clad figure standing in front of her. The monster then reached him, but seemed lifeless as it approached in its leap. The figure then grabbed hold of it and shoved it aside, the monster falling limp to the street, lifeless. The next thing was a blur, as she felt herself pulled to her feet and instantly dragged by her arm to a tight alleyway and let to lean against a wall to recover. Things started to come back into focus as she saw a bit more detail in her rescuer, but in the darkness it was still limited to a few glimmering details, like his long overcoat and the large pistol in his right hand, the barrel still smoking gently in the still night air. His face was turned away from her, peeking around the corner that he was leaning against. But after the ringing in her ears started to calm down, she looked again to see the outline of her saviour's face in the moonlight. "Are you all right?" he half whispered to her. Either her voice or her mind couldn't catch properly to respond. "What's your name?" Madison," she managed to eke out. "Well, Madison, I'm Radha. Try to stay quiet. There are more of them out here tonight." "They'll have heard that. Can you walk?" "We have to move," Radha said quietly. Yes," Madison whispered. No sooner were the words out of her mouth before Radha's cold hand gripped her wrist and pulled her in tow to the nearest alleyway, then down into the darkened houses beyond the strip of homes the people of Boulder City had made for themselves, out into the night. Radha moved quickly and knowingly, while Madison had to force her attention to keep on the speed of travel. Everything was whizzing by so fast, she could hardly think to see where she was being led. All that she could concentrate on was the icy grip on her wrist and her feet, determined to keep from falling, even though it threatened her a time or two. Before her legs really started getting tired though, he led her to a dead-end alleyway, which was laterally dominated by trash cans and one dumpster on its side, with one lid missing. "Here, climb in. You can hide here." Radha rushed, guiding her in. "What?" Madison asked, confused. "We won't be able to outrun them. Hide here and I'll take care of them." Radha insists before helping her climb in. You're going to leave me here?" Madison asks with a bit of panic. "Not by yourself. Here," Radha says, his hand turning the large pistol he was carrying towards her. Madison, unsure of what was happening, stuttered out. "This is Onryo. She's very special," Radha tells as he lowers the wooden grip of the pistol into her hand. Clasping her fingers to it, she will kill anything she shoots. Anything, man or monster. "Have you fired a gun before?" Yes, my dad taught me," Madison says with gaining confidence. "Good. This one is probably a little different. You have to pull back the hammer all the way before you can fire. Stay hidden and stay quiet. Don't shoot unless you have to. I'll be back shortly. Don't worry," Radha explains as he backs from the entrance to the overturned dumpster, his hand ruffling in his pocket and pulling out what looks like a small glass vial filled with dark blue liquid. "This will keep them off your scent for a while, but hold your breath for as long as you can so you don't cough." The thin glass vial shattered on the inner wall of the dumpster quietly, after Madison took her breath and sunk into the garbage. Radha disappeared like a flash from sight, and after a few seconds, the sudden loneliness struck Madison like a bolt of lightning, her stomach flattening into nothing. She was alone, in the dark, in the night, hiding in a dumpster while monsters roamed the street, and no real hope that her saviour would actually come back, alive or not. The heavy pistol shook in her hands as she used both to hold onto it. It was only then that she realised she was still holding her breath, as her head suddenly became back to reality with a pounding throb. She fought the need to yell out a breath and managed to release the spent breath slowly, but the breath in was something to fight with. The smell of garbage invaded her nostrils again, but this time intensely amplified by the horrendously harsh chemical smell that the vial had contained. It smelled sharp. That's the only word she could muster for it. Sharp and powerful. Her lungs ached for breath as she managed to swallow the tainted air down. Feeling her whole body hurt from the lack of oxygen. Just as she started that breath, though, it was nearly scared back out of her. A loud roar into the night cut short. Had her saviour found what he was looking for, or did it find him? Again, another roar, this time louder and closer. Growling growing louder and louder in her ears as whatever it was approached her. Her hands gripped the pistol handle tightly, her thumb gently grazing the hammer as she focused on the 3 steps she remembered for firing a gun. Take aim, squeeze trigger, no, pull hammer, then take aim, then squeeze trigger. Breathe, focus. Her eyes opened wide as around the corner, from what she could see of the alleyway, a monster came. She stayed absolutely still in the darkness of her filthy fortress, hands on the pistol, its barrel trembling in aim towards the monster. Could she hit it from this far? What if this old-looking gun wasn't accurate? What if she missed? The monster suddenly flipped around from its vantage point, seeming to look straight at her. It couldn't see her. It couldn't. A low, loud growl as it hunkered itself down, its claws digging into the broken asphalt of the alleyway as it poised itself for a strike. And, just as she blinked, it leapt. Her thumb missed the hammer the first time, but on the second pull made it to the first click. The trigger did nothing. She gasped in her panic as she saw it still airborne coming for her. It was going to kill her. Then, like a blur, with a flash of shining steel, a figure moved towards the approaching monster from over top her field of view. Seemingly from right over the dumpster and towards it, she watched as Radha landed with a slide on his feet, a long machete in hand. The monster came down with a snarling growl on him, claws extended right for him, and as it reached him, the blade in his hand came up with a slash right across the monster's stomach. The beast flipped over him and landed on its back with a loud noise of pain and impact, one of its hands cradling the wound that spewed blood and threatened organs. Radha turned back to it, the bloodied blade dripping as he reapproached it. Putting one heavy boot on its face, holding it down, Madison watched the blade come up, but had to close her eyes and only listen to the sound of the blade finding flesh, then asphalt with the strike. She wept, the shaky pistol still in her hands. Everything that was happening was coming at once, cascading onto her as she felt crushed beneath the world so rudely exposed to her. Her life was common as it was before, helping with the chores, learning a trade to maybe pay for her future, and a family of her own. But now she was dragged into this cavalcade of monsters and death, where every move might be one's last. She cried, but forced her eyes to open as she heard footsteps of her saviour approaching. She felt a wave of relief hit her when she saw that he was unharmed, though splattered with the blood of his hunt. The machete had long since been put away on the hip sheath she now saw beneath his coat. Madison climbed out from beneath the dumpster pile, brushing and cleaning trash off as she almost wanted to run to him and thank him for saving her, but unfortunately that was cut short. A quiet beeping came into being, a wristwatch. Radha's face turned to one of horror. Before he pulled his sleep back, the beeping of his uncovered digital watch sounding its alarm. Radha's cool exterior cracked as he searched his pockets for something frantically. Radha? Madison asked in concern. Stay away, give me a moment, Radha said with a decisive tone, his hand finding what it was looking for in a small black pouch. When he zippered it open, he dug his hand in and started bringing out what looked like a syringe at first glance. Suddenly, though, as he found what he was looking for, he cried out in instantaneous pain, sending the contents of the pouch tumbling to the ground and scattering. Radha's hand clenched his chest as he gasped for breath, his whole body undergoing intense spasms as he fell to his hands and knees, his hands fumbling to find at least one of the needles. Madison was shocked and approached to help, but Radha again warned her, but this time his voice was almost not his own. "Stay away!" he nearly roared. "Stay away!" The sudden audible shock sent Madison tumbling onto her rear. Out of sheer fright of the noise, her fingers were trembling and twitching as he grabbed onto one of the needle's casings, eliciting a loud groan as she watched a most peculiar and horrifying thing. His hand was changing. She watched the scowl size of the needle shrink in his expanding grip as his fingers worked delicate work to remove the cap of the syringe. He was groaning and crying out in pain every second as his body shook and kicked. And even when he wasn't expressing his pain, he was breathing vocally as if absolute agony. He was tortured under his own skin. Finally, he managed to grip the minuscule needle in his monstrous hand and force the tip into his thigh, his thumb pushing the plunger down. Madison watched as things continued for a while longer. The spent needle sent across the asphalt as Radha pounded at the ground, growling and fighting something she couldn't see, but was forced to watch as her mind froze. He was one of them. He was becoming one of them. With a loud growl of pain, Radha's face came up to meet eye to eye with Madison, whose tears were now streaming as her world was yanked again from out under her. Her hands gripped onto the pistol again, pointing right at his face as he shook, his golden eyes looking like they were fighting just to stay conscious. Madison still cried. She didn't want to kill him when he had saved her life twice. But what did he want? How could she help him? Was it even him to help anymore? Madison watched in terror as his face started to contort and stretch, his teeth beginning to extend beyond his lips. But just as suddenly as it started, it ceased. Radha's body fell limp against the asphalt as whatever he had dosed himself with seemed to have worked. His breathing was much more relaxed, though against the now tight constraints of his clothes, there was still room for improvement. His body was contorted in shape between his former self and the monsters he had just finished dispatching. Eventually, though, glazed eyes came up to peer down the barrel again, watching the still shaking Madison and the gun with the hammer pulled all the way back in his face, threatening to end his existence. Radha's hand, if you could still call it that, came up with such speed and grace that the only response Madison could come up with was to squeak and squeeze the trigger on the heavy pistol. Despite the moral battle in her head, her eyes clenched shut as she had mixed feelings to where the hand was going to hit her. But nothing expected occurred. The hammer came down on the pistol with a quiet click of its release, and the pistol in her hand grew much heavier. Her eyes opened to see that Radha's hand had blocked the hammer's fall and was now weighing heavily on the pistol. As his eyes still watched hers, she was at the mercy of him. If he had any mercy left to give, she couldn't think. She could hardly breathe. Well, a growly, raspy voice came out of the changed man's throat. When it's time for me to join my brothers in arms. His tongue was working overtime to dodge the long ivory in his mouth. It will be by my own hand, no sooner. About then is when Madison passed out from the shock. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that story. Absolutely loved reading through this one. Very excited to feature it on the channel. As I say, that's part 1 or chapter 1 of a series. Stay tuned to hear the next part. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Please, of course, do let me know down below in the comments. Of course, please do like and share. If you haven't subscribed to DMT, smash that subscribe button to stay up to date with all DMT content. We have some very exciting stuff coming over the next few weeks. As ever, guys, thanks for watching. And remember, be safe, not sorry.